Welcome to Beyond Belief, Tales of Religious Exodus, where we delve into the personal journeys of people who've left fundamentalist religions. In this series, we explore their experiences within religion, their journey out, and how they found meaning and healing on the other side.
Awesome. So, Jennie, welcome to Beyond Beliefs, and we're
Thank you.
excited to have you on board. And I'll say, we haven't spoken to many Christians yet
Okay.
from a Jewish background, and so there's an extra level of interest that I have in the Christian stories and the ways in which things are different, and the ways things are actually similar, and all that overlap. So I welcome that throughout. So. Yeah, to start out with, can you give us like a really broad background of what sort of denomination you were raised in? Like what your
Yeah.
environment was like as you were growing up religious?
It was very conservative. I grew up in the Presbyterian tradition, but it was also, my family was also really influenced by the Christian Reformed Church, which is a Dutch background. Yeah. I grew up Presbyterian. I attended, there was a mega youth group in my town that I grew up in central Ontario, that had a Pentecostal church, the Baptist church, and the Presbyterian church, and we all got together to make like a mega youth group. So I was involved in that in high school too. So,
And in general, this podcast, I aim to have things a bit more personal. It's not really about the big picture, but it is something that I am curious about. Yeah, on a more subtle level of there's only a few different denominations of Judaism that exist at this point in the world, and maybe it's proportionate to the amount of Jews there are, maybe. But the different denominations of Christianity, from the outsider, we're always portrayed as that they're always infighting, they really don't get along. And I think historically there's been huge, the Protestants versus the Catholics and stuff like that. So what is it like for, seemingly, I mean, just in what you were just saying, you have Presbyterian who are informed by Reform, and then you have a youth group that's got all these different denominations. What is that like within the Christian world? I mean, at least from your experience.
I never really experienced any infighting in the different denominations. And so in my own extended family, there were people who go to different denominations, and I have an uncle who is a pastor in one denomination. I have another uncle who's a priest in the Episcopalian church. And it's never been an issue that we're different, but I have always seen it as more of different styles of ways to worship God. Maybe you want to focus on a different area. Then a lot of people are uncomfortable with people raising their hands in worships in the Presbyterian church that I grew up in. But in the Pentecostal church, that's just a different style, and people are more free to be more physical in the way that they worship. So that's really the way that I've always seen the difference between the denominations.
Okay, so it's a stylistic thing a lot of the time.
Well, there is definitely a level of doctrine differences and ways that they view the Bible. But as long as you believe that Jesus is your Lord and Savior and you have been baptized, I have never really experienced being from a different denomination as being problematic.
Interesting. Okay, yeah. Because the reputation is that some denominations, again, within the context of what we're discussing here, will fuck you up more than others. That's certainly how it is.
I've seen that
Yeah.
in between Catholics and Protestants. That's really where I see that difference. Not in different Protestant denominations, but between Protestant as a whole and Catholics. And I've always really believed that that's because Catholics don't believe that Protestants are real Christians.
Okay. So when you say you've seen people more messed up, or you've seen the stigma, the assumption.
That's the stigma. Yeah, the infighting that you were talking about.
Oh,
Maybe.
I was actually talking from a different angle right now. I was saying as far as the how harmed you will be by religion, not all sects or denominations of Christianity would be equally harmful. Like stereotypically, and you can correct me, evangelical could be more harmful than a really chilled out, Protestant church where you go twice a year, and it's kind of how in good, yeah.
And that's not the level of harmfulness in that case isn't based on the church, but it's based on your level of commitment to it. That's what I would say.
Okay.
So if you're only going twice a year, you're getting just the bare bones of what church is. But if you're involved and you're going to different events, or you're involved in leadership in the church, or whatever it is, then you may be more inclined to have to believe certain things so that you can still be a part of the group in the way that you're normally a part of the group. So yeah, I don't see that as being a denomination specific thing, but as your own personal level of commitment to it.
Yeah, I hear that. I mean, it's ideas like hell, for example, right?
Yeah.
Some denominations might be more fixated on the concept of hell, and some would be like, no, it doesn't really exist for us, like things like that. Then, assuming, let's say you have 100% buy-in from a congregant into
Yeah.
a sampling of different denominations of Christianity, the premise, which we could test, statistically or whatever, is that some would emerge more harmed than other just by the different doctrines they've bought into. This might be false. This is true for sure. Like in Orthodox Judaism, where I come from, we could definitely say, oh, if you're from there, man, I feel sorry for you because you were both at 100% commitment. But I know what 100% commitment looks like for denomination X, and it's way more intense than 100% commitment for denomination Y.
So what you're asking how that relates to my experience.
So this was a bit broad, so we don't have to
Yeah.
go all philosophical here. So to
Yeah.
bring it back to your experience, what was it like for you to grow up in this type of environment overall? Like, how would you describe it?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question because at the time it was something that I really needed and
Okay.
it was very beneficial to me. But now looking back on it, I see how harmful it has been and how it has really led to ruining some relationships. And I'm thinking of one friend in high school in particular that I had who I was like, I feel really shameful about some of the things that I did in the name of religion towards her. And if I wasn't so steeped in that culture of Christianity and needing to be saved, then I feel like maybe we could still be friends. But I
Yeah.
don't know. Who knows? That was like 20 years ago. So
Yeah. I resonate with that a lot. I think the hardest things for me in my own religious journey has been the things religion got me to do to other people, not to myself, not the things that I compromised on, but the ways in which it got me to act against my own better judgment or morals because that's just what I needed to do. And that's the hardest thing because you become a perpetrator in a way.
yeah. In my experience, it was that with this particular friend, I remember writing her a letter. No, I don't think I wrote her a letter. I wrote her a description of hell and what it was. And I was like, see, if you don't get saved, this is going to be your experience after you die. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. That is
Yeah.
so terrible. Can you imagine receiving that from
Yeah.
somebody who wanted you to be their friend?
Yeah.
Like, that's crazy. And I feel so embarrassed about that. So yeah, I don't know if she remembers getting that and reading it, but I remember staying there and watching her reading it. And then I don't really remember her reaction. And man, I feel so terrible about that.
Yeah.
But
And it's
it's
20
all
years
in the
later.
name of wanting her to be
Yeah.
saved. Yes, 20 years later.
Yeah. And
It's
did you
all in
feel
the name of
compelled?
wanting her to be saved, but I feel compelled to do that.
Exactly.
I don't remember why I did that. I think I really cared for her and I really did like her and I really wanted to be a good friend to her. And I think I wrote that because I cared about her so much.
For sure. And that's all you know. You're watching those closest to you drive off a cliff, and to the best of your knowledge, it's all you got to do to save them. It's interesting. I was the recipient of a letter like that, not
Okay.
description of hell, but I left religion, and I was actually still right in front of this school that I was raised in for like 12 years. Like I moved back in with my parents, and I was right there. And every day, and I just ended up bumping into a childhood friend, my oldest friend. Like I knew him since I was 5 years old. He was still deeply religious, and I wasn't. And he was privy to some of my journeys and trials and tribulations. And so his letter was a little bit more around like philosophy of why bad things happen to good people. But it was this 4 pages of like really basic Jewish philosophy that, of course, I was familiar with. 'Cause I'd been grappling with it for years. So on one hand, I was very touched that he had sat and really penned this thing. I could barely understand part of the handwriting. It was fascinating. And we never wrote letters to each other. It's not a thing
Yeah.
men in our community did. So there was that gesture, but then there was also being spoken to like I'm like 3 years old kind of thing, like really thinking that you can simplify all of my journey to about 4 pages of text. I don't hold it against him, but it's a fascinating thing. People feel really compelled to do all sorts of things. So I resonate with that. Can you elaborate a bit on, you felt at the time was something you needed? What was it that you needed?
Yeah. So I needed it because of my family. And it was religion, moving to religion, turning to God and using that as a crutch was the only way that I could survive my family environment. So my dad died when I was 8, and my mom was emotionally not mature enough to be able to raise me in particular, because I'm very sensitive and emotional, and she just couldn't figure that out because of her own upbringing. And so I really turned to God as the emotional stability and the church and the people that I knew in the church as supports for getting me through until I could leave.
Hmm. So it did give you good stuff. It was
It did.
benefits for you at
At
the
the
time.
time, yeah, I
Yeah.
survived because of it, I think.
So everyone goes, okay. How many siblings did you have?
And 2.
2 siblings.
Yeah, 2
Well,
sisters.
you're not the oldest, right?
No, I'm the middle child.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. And I appreciate that nuance, right? I think part of this, what this conversations are all about is like, let's acknowledge the good parts. Let's acknowledge what you've had to like leave behind.
Yeah.
So, you're growing up, it's given you a certain structure, a certain sense of safety, maybe, right? And okay, community, like youth groups, other friends. And then, so when did you find yourself moving away from it?
So I actually recently had a conversation with my former youth pastor from when I was in high school, and I don't remember how much I got into detail about how much I moved away from Christianity with them. With them, I mean him and his wife. And I remember his wife saying to me, like recently, like last year or something, that I've always been questioning things. I've always had a lot of difficult questions about it. And so I think like there was always an aspect of, this doesn't really sit right with me. And I remember I lived in Japan for about 4 years as well. And I went to church in Japan. And I remember when I had learned enough Japanese, trying to have a conversation with my pastor who doesn't speak English, or didn't at the time anyway, about how can people who have never heard of the name of Jesus go to hell? And I was trying to have that conversation with him in Japanese. And I was really, just because of the language barrier. But yeah, so that was, oh gosh, how long ago was that? It's 2024 now. So it would have been like 15 years ago that I had that conversation. But I don't really consider my deconstruction process starting until maybe, oh God, maybe 2015. 10,
Okay.
yeah, just
So
less than 10
still
years
like
ago.
9 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what did that process look like at that point? So there's always these questions, but then it starts
Yeah.
becoming more official or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it was listening to different experiences. I think that was really the main thing. So at that time, about 15 years ago, I was living in Winnipeg and I was attending the Vineyard Church in Winnipeg. And I had some friends one of my friends had introduced me to the Liturgist podcast, and which is actually how I found this book group that I know I got your information from. So the Liturgist podcast, my friend recommended me to listen to it, and I really enjoyed listening to it and like asking all these questions. And at the same time at my church, or like close to the same time, there was one of my friends in my church, the Vineyard Church there, who was having a difficult experience with the leadership because she was coming out as bi. And so it brought up this whole conversation in that church about what are we going to do about the gays? And so there was another woman in the church who also identified as a part of the LGBT community, but denied it and saying, this is not godly for me. And then my friend was like, no, but this is godly for me. And so then we had this whole conversation about what do we do? And like, what is our stance going to be as a church towards the LGBT community? And it was really through that conversation and seeing how that hurt my friend who was bi and like leaning into her identity, and how hurt she was by what had happened in our church and how we had ended up after that discussion. And there were some other things going on in the church then too that I was just like, this is really disgusting, relating to pastors who are sexually inappropriate with people.
Mhm.
And so all of that was kind of happening like right after the other. And I was also in an abusive marriage at that time.
Mhm.
And so all of my things coming together, really, I think all of those 3 things were the biggest things that kind of collaborated when they collided. It all be like, you know what? I don't think that the church is something that I can be a part of right now.
Mhm.
And then I went to Emmanuel College for my master. I did a master in pastoral studies, and I just graduated last year. And I started in 2021, 2020. Yeah, 2020 I started. So just during the pandemic years, I was there. And I learned so much about how the Bible has been mistranslated and abused so that people can have power over other people, particularly women. And I'm like, I am not okay with this. So right now, my stance is that I don't know what I believe about Jesus. He may have been a good guy with good intentions, but the Bible has been so misused that I can't trust it. And so, court jury's out and it's not coming back. So I'm still very spiritual, but I'm really not a part of the Christian church at all.
Yeah. Amazing. That was a very concise summary. I think I have a whole lot. I have so many questions. I'm gonna go back and ask some of them. So I'm curious about the pastor's behaviors, because of course that's a fascinating bit, and you might not want to elaborate too much on it. But was it two questions for you about that? One, was it a well known fact? Did you happen to be
No,
privy to it? It was just like
no,
yeah.
it was
Yeah.
it came out. I don't remember how exactly it came out, but he was arrested in California on holidays with his family because of certain behaviors, and he spent some time in jail in California because of that. And so, of course, like nobody in the church knew. Like so many people were shocked. Everybody was like, I had no idea. Like he was never like this around me. There was no instances of the same behavior in our church community. And it was a huge shock to everybody. And there was a bunch of meetings about like debriefing from it, how to grieve what had happened because of like so many people loved him and cherished him. And then it's like, how can you reconcile this guy that we knew with the guy who was arrested? Like it, it doesn't compute. So it was, yeah, I forget your question, but that's where I went.
Yeah. So continuing in that line,
Yeah,
the church, it sounds like, handled it as well as it could. Like
I think so.
they didn't shelter him and they
No.
tried to help you cope with it. Was it a behavior he engaged in California? Like while on vacation, he engaged in this behavior, whatever it was,
Yeah.
and got arrested immediately for it, essentially.
Yeah.
But there was no, okay. And I'm curious, really, again, on your personal meaning journey around that, that seemed to result in an issue with you with the church itself, right? And can you elaborate on that?
Well,
Because seemingly you
yeah.
could say, like the apologetics often do, it's like, yeah, we can't explain everybody's behaviors
Yeah.
and people are people. And so
Yeah.
you hear that a
Love sinner
lot.
sin. Love the
Yeah.
sinner, hate the sin. Yeah, for sure. Also, around that time, I think socially, there had been a lot of about the residential schools and coming out of how the priests in the residential schools had been abusing the Indigenous children and recognizing there's like a huge recognizing in our society at how terrible that is. And it's coming out at that time about all of the Catholic abuses of the priests towards the kids. And so I think with that backdrop, knowing what happened with my pastor in that church, it was like, no, we can't condone this guy at all. Like he can't be a pastor. Like this is not okay. Especially like maybe if it had happened 10 years ago, it might have been handled a little bit differently. But I think because of all of that coming out in our society and our culture, it would just really shut down and he's not a part of the vineyard anymore.
Well, obviously, and I'm glad the church handled it that way. I'm curious for you, it seems like it represented a break. And I guess it sounds to me like it was a personal experience of a broader philosophical issue with the church and its behaviors and its cover-ups and its lack of accountability. And here you have that personal taste of that which you've heard, and it hits so much closer to home.
I think so.
Yeah. And if I may ask, this is somewhat
Yeah.
personal, but the abusive marriage, can we elaborate
Mhm.
on that? You okay
Yeah.
with that? Um, Again, from there, what parts of that do you relate back to religion? Was it an arranged marriage
Oh, no,
or
it
things
was an
like that?
arranged marriage, but it definitely relates to religion. So as a woman, I was taught, probably a lot of women can relate to this, that being a wife and a mother are the most important things that you can do, the most godly things that you can do, most fulfilling things that you can do. And so I got married. I lived in Japan, like I mentioned, and I decided to come back to Canada when I probably didn't need to. And so when I came back to Canada, because sorry, let me start over. I lived in Japan for about 4 years. And when I decided to come back to Canada, it was like all of my life goals had been completed and I had nothing else to do. So the next thing was, I guess, to get married. I was just kind of like rolling with the punches of life. And okay, well, this is coming up, so I guess I'll do this. And then this guy had expressed interest into me. And I was like, well, I guess, yeah, marriage and family, that's next, right? And I didn't take the time to do any self-healing from my emotional wounds from how I grew up. And so that really led to me being susceptible to an abusive relationship. And yes, I guess that answers your question, maybe.
Yeah, so really the Christian parts or the part of the doctrine that dictated how you should go about being a wife put you at so much greater risk. And then also even in the marriage, navigating the relationship, it colors how you show up and what you're allowed to say and push back or not push back, take it. And so it ends up taking maybe potentially bad situation and making it so much worse.
Yeah, especially because the abuse that I went through was emotional and psychological and
Yeah.
not physical. Because I always said, like, if a guy hits me, I'm not going to be with him. But he never did.
Yeah.
And it was when he actually, the last straw that really kind of checked me out of the marriage finally was when he called me stupid.
Hmm.
And I'm like, I would tell my daughter now, like, if anybody ever calls you stupid, they're not your friend.
Yeah.
And you do not need to be around them at all. So yeah, I stayed for far too long because of the hope that I had in the Christian upbringing that I had been given.
What type of hope or false hope in this case did it instill?
That people can change, that my husband loves me, that my husband would die for me, and like Christ, there's a verse in Ephesians or something that's like, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Wow, that came out so easily.
You got it.
And then, yeah, and then the wives submit to your husband. So yeah, it was hope that, that love that Christ, no, that I guess it was Paul who wrote that. Anyway,
Yeah.
the love that we are told that Christ had for the church was the same love that our husbands would have for us as wives. And I held out hope that that was true,
Yeah.
when in reality it wasn't.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. I'll share from the male side of it all. I don't know if it gets spoken as much because the female suffering in this area and the classic roles of the wives suffering is very obvious. I was actually burdened by the inverse of that. Like, you're the man of the house, you're responsible for everything. And there was so much that was out of my control that I still blamed myself for. And that's like the that leadership at all costs kind of thing, even though when there's nothing I could do. So I was harmed by the inverse of that same kind of statement. So I can relate a lot to that. So, between there's just childhood stuff, right? Just how your mother was and stuff like that. And then it's compounded by religion. Religion is always such a compounding factor, right? It takes everything and makes it more of it. What has your journey out been like? This journey of healing, really, and maybe very much still in it.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing. I actually just ordered this book from Amazon, The Shamanic
The
Journey.
shamanic journey, okay.
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
Well, this is I've my journey out of Christianity has looked like I've never been able to deny the existence of a God or gods. And I've had dreams and visions and very spiritual experiences even after leaving the church that I still can never say that, like, there there is something spiritual. There is a spiritual world around us. And I do really want to connect with that. And for a while, I identified as a witch, and I may still be, but I haven't really done any practicing or thinking about that since I've been graduated and trying to figure out my work and supporting myself, like, financially and everything. So Yeah, I haven't really done a lot of that recently, but it's definitely been there is something that I need to connect to, and I feel very connected to. And even now talking about it, I just kind of feel like this kind of warmth in my chest that is like, this is right. This is the place that I need to be in. And it's been very, very healing.
Hmm. Can you tell me more about that? Because I think a lot of people, the biggest thing that they're missing after religion is some sort of spirituality. And it's going to look different for different people. So I only want to know
Yeah.
like what it means to you. But that big void that gets created, we're all looking to fill it with something, I think. And so, yeah, tell me more about that.
I think a lot of the void there might be community related, because when you
Mhm.
leave a church, you really leave a huge group of people who would be there to cheer you on and cry with you and do all of the things that, a family might do with you or a group of friends might do with you. So like I've never been able to find a community of people who I can kind of have rally around me regularly like that. Like there are, of course, there have been people who have been there to support me and cry with me, but it's very few and far in between. And when you're going to a church every week or multiple times a week, it's it's so different. And so yeah, that's definitely a huge void that I still have. And I wish that I could have that back, but I'm not willing to compromise my myself again. So
Can you elaborate on that feeling, that warm feeling, that's the spiritual connectedness to something, to gods, something like that? Can you tell me more about that? Where you derive that from, what it means to
where I
you?
derive that from? What do you mean?
There's some sort of spirituality that you're still tapped into,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And not quite witch anymore, but something like that. And what are the tenets of that world in which you live?
I think it's really hard for me to answer because I've always had this even before, like when I was still a Christian. And I maybe called it different things, like, but I don't. It's about redefining how I relate to God. And in the Christian church, we're always talking about loving God and worshiping God, but those are not words that I use anymore. And I prefer to use the terms like connect with God. And like I feel a big connection in that. And I think that's what that warmth is. When I was talking about God, then it was, I'm still connected to her. She's still here with me, embodying me. I am God also, in a way. That sounds so sacrilegious and I feel weird saying that, but it's also kind of true. But yeah, it's the way that I still connect with God and I find ways to connect with God.
Yeah. So, I mean, just from what I'm hearing, there's God as a she, so there's a feminine aspect of it, and there is
Also,
a very accessible. You can embody it, like you are an expression of, or actually, and I guess one of the big questions, and I'm getting a little bit philosophical with you here, but does this God have a purpose or goals, or is it just a presence?
I don't know. So I have a friend who is a psychic, and whenever we get together and we talk, they're always like, we talk a lot about spiritual stuff. And one of the things that I'm learning from them is that God does have a will and a plan for our lives and desires for us for our lives, but humans still also have free will and we can really choose to go along with it or not. And I've seen that kind of come alive in ways that I never did before. And so yeah, I'm still kind of unsure about exactly what's going on there, but does God have a will for our lives? I guess so. I think God really does want to connect with us and to have us connect with them, because God is also interested in I think when we are living authentically and honestly and able to do emotional healing, we can really live live out our greater purpose, I guess. And I think that is just to learn more about ourselves and each other. And yeah, I don't even know beyond that.
I love it. This is great. And so, you believe that there is, because what struck me is you're learning from this friend, and they taught you something, right? And taught you something. I guess it could be two ways. It could be invited you to experience something yourself, Or it could be like, these are some facts that I'm going to share with you
There's
now.
the facts one.
The facts one. Okay, so if it's the facts one, I'm curious, especially with your background, do you believe that there is some sort of objective truth and we simply can align ourselves with it or find out about it? Or is it subjective, meaning making this is how I feel the world works?
I think it is probably a combination, but I think there's more subjective truth than we really realize.
Mhm. And so when your friend teaches you, how does that fit into, are they sharing their subjective truth with you and you take it on because it feels right to you as well subjectively?
Well, because I'm free to take that information and analyze it and like sit with it, chew it for a while and kind of really try to look at it from all of the angles and determine what I really think about that piece of information. And yes, my friend may very well believe that to be true, but I can be like, this doesn't really align with my experiences. So I'm just going to put this on the shelf as something that my friend believes and just take down and hold what I believe to be the best thing for me.
So you could still disregard a piece of information or make it your own through your own process. And so that still goes to a synthesis as opposed to being fed to you as a dogma. This is it, deal
Yeah.
with it kind of thing.
Well,
Yeah.
there's also like the spiritual term of discernment. Like in Christian churches, we're taught a lot about discernment and discerning what is the will of God, what is the voice of God. And so, yeah, it's that teaching from the Christian churches that I'm also taking and applying to this one too.
Interesting. So if I run with that for a second, what would the Christian church say about your discernment? Are you technically correct because you discerned and therefore you
No, I
discern
would
differently?
definitely be a heretic. No, I think that they would say that Christians, if they heard me talking about that, they would say that then I'm not discerning it properly because it doesn't align with the scriptures. It doesn't align with what we teach about God. And I like that's the way that Christians use it. Like, does it align with what Jesus said? Does it align with what our pastors say? Because they're doing all the studying into the Word of God and they have like more information than us regular people do. But I'm taking that information from my friend and applying it to my authentic self, as authentic as I can be anyway, and using myself as the plumb line.
Yeah. So what are you holding it up against? Are you holding it up against some book or some other person's opinion and
No.
to get it, or against yourself? And that you're saying is the main distinction between how you would discern something and how the church would have you discern something. And
So
yeah,
I'm really taking it and trying to use my intuition about that information
exactly.
and use
Yeah.
like how my body feels about it. If I have
Yeah.
like a particular gut feeling about it, instead of going to a book or another person for this information.
Exactly.
I'm trying to use myself as that piece that I need to weigh it against.
Yeah. And I would say for myself, just I'll share that one of the hardest struggles for me was those times where my gut was already telling me stuff back then and you're forced to disregard it. Like it doesn't matter what your gut says and you just got to do what the rules are. And again, very similar to what we spoke about before about stuff that relates to other people is that selling of your own soul, ironically,
Yeah.
that occurs here. That is oftentimes the most painful and damaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned emotional healing, and I'm curious, you've been on, I'm sure, on a long journey of emotional healing. What have been the main things that you have found to be emotional healing?
The main things that I have found to be emotional healing. So I've been in therapy for over 4 years now with the same therapist. He's actually the one who recommended this shamanic journey book to me. And one of the things that he has done for me has been like probably number one, the most emotionally healing thing for me. And that's just simply validation. Something that I never got from my family growing up. And I don't know if I could say I even sought it from the church. But yeah, no, just saying that I'm not crazy. I'm going through a shit ton of hard things right now. And it's okay to be a mess. And yeah, that's not okay for people to say that, do that, whatever. Absolutely, you're allowed to feel whatever you feel about that. And yeah, that has been the most transformative for me.
Amazing. Yeah. And it goes to show, I think, both sides, how helpful we can be to other people just by simply validating them. And I think that's the purpose of this entire show, is just multiple people getting on and saying, I went through something similar that you did. And what you're going through resonates with so many stories from multiple denominations, right? The isolation, it all kind of still has those those themes. And then the flip side too, how damaging it is to be invalidated by an institution or people who say, oh yeah, you need to feel a certain way all the time. This is it, and therefore you should be feeling this way. And if you're not, there's something wrong with you.
I think it also has to be done in a certain way too. So like as a psychotherapist, there's the term unconditional positive regard
Yeah.
that we have towards our clients. And like sure you can say, yeah, you're allowed to feel upset about that and then not kind of mean it.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a skill to have to be able to tell somebody you're going through a really hard time and I'm really sorry and I see you and if there's any way that I can support you, then I'm here for you. Not everybody can do that, and it can be really hard to do that.
Yeah. Especially if their views are different than your own, right? It's can be particularly hard to contain those different things. Certainly in the matters of religion, that's something new for me to be able to have complete, like a more, not complete, but more open regard for people who stay religious or choose to be religious and not have a lot of that anger that I used to have
Yeah.
around that, for example. So kind of in that vein and leaning into the psychodynamic sides of it, you had mentioned earlier that, that at the time religion was really helpful for your younger self. And it's almost like a trade-off. We have to make many trade-offs as we mature. And that was a huge trade-off. So if you could go back in time, would there be something that you would say or do to your younger self
For what purpose?
to change the trajectory of things? I would say we all, we can look back on our lives and be like, okay, this is how I got here. But I
Yeah.
wish sometimes there's like, and it could be a specific incident or it could be a very
Yeah.
broad thing. I wish I had been told earlier that.
What I really needed as a younger person in order to not kind of have this harmful Christian theology is just to have somebody constantly with me, like a mother who would be able to be the kind of mother that I really needed for myself. And so if it was just like a one-off, I'm going back into my past to, give little Jennie a message so that she doesn't fuck up her life. I don't know if that would have worked because it was the years of living with an emotionally immature mother and the years of being under the influence of the church and of being isolated from friends because of how religious I was. And I needed somebody to come alongside me and be my friend.
Yeah.
Be my guide, be my nurturer, a mother, essentially, how I see it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's very wise. And I think it speaks to a lot of like the regrets we can sometimes fill ourselves with of like, oh, if only I had done X, Y, and Z at that time. But it's really a stack of everything that led to that moment that molds us into who we are. And it's never typically one thing. Although sometimes there's those moments, those critically defining moments
Don't
as
trust
well.
him. Don't trust him.
Yeah.
Have that message going on with my head.
Don't trust it. Okay, so there you go. There's one, right? Who's the him you're referring to? Is this your ex-husband?
Yes, and I also think in a broader sense, the church, the leaders
Okay.
of the church.
Yeah. So whisper that message to your younger self in their ear to the degree that would register at the time. They'd be ready to hear
Maybe.
that. But maybe a little bit of mistrust can help
Yeah.
temper some of
Yeah.
the wholehearted. It's a real cynical manipulation of those who are the most open-hearted, if you will, the most open to just tell me and I'll do it kind of thing, will be the most trodden over. There's a lot of people I find who, they're half in, half out, and they kind of solid bar religion, I've heard it referred to. And I think they're taking the best parts of the church and making their own and disregarding the rest, which is honestly the way to do it. But there's a type of person who just is willing to do whatever it takes, and they get actually much more used and abused by the church. They would probably not ready to hear this, but could use some separation from some like, yeah.
Like
I resonate a lot with that from my own journey. So therapy, is there anything else that you found helpful?
in my healing journey.
Yeah.
It was doing my master's programs and becoming a psychotherapist myself.
Really?
I think the combination of those two things, the therapy I've had over the last 4 years and the learning about psychotherapy, like combined, has just, shot me up a million times faster than if I had them separately.
So tell me about that. How did learning to be a psychotherapist yourself help you?
Yeah, good question. It's kind of like learning to become a psychotherapist is kind of like learning. No, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I graduated a year ago and I feel like I should answer this, but my mind is going blank. I also just finished the CRPO exam today, so I'm kind of like reeling from that.
Oh, congrats. Is that the
Yeah,
one
thank
where
you.
you move out of, is it like you move out of Q to regular
You have
or
to pass this exam to move out of Q, yes.
out of Q? Okay.
Yeah, but you still have to have all of your direct client contact hours and supervision hours before you can move out of Q. So
So you,
I haven't yet, no.
okay, so you've done that. Okay. That's one
Yeah.
of the milestones you've got to do.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, okay, doing the psychotherapy program was helpful because you were, I was learning about things, and some of the assignments I was doing, I could use my own experiences and relate to. And I could study different topics that I was interested in for my own personal reasons. And so it was kind of like extra homework for therapy in a way. Like, I can't even think of any assignments I did, but one of the courses I did was on trauma. And in my trauma course, I focused on things that I feel like I needed to learn about so that I could also just heal from what I had been through.
So you basically get this big education and it's supposed to be for helping other people, but you're just getting educated to help yourself. How you
Yeah.
work, what, you know, maybe there was probably a lot of aha moments. It's like, oh, this explains that, or
Yeah.
I could actually be doing this for that. And so you're actually applying these principles firstly for your own
Yeah.
healing.
Oh, this is an unhealthy coping mechanism. Yeah, I do that. Oh,
Exactly.
oh.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you had been doing many things before you decided to be a psychotherapist. What was that process for you that you decided to go into this field?
Yeah, so I had left my ex back in 2019. I moved to Ontario because my family is all in Ontario. And I was talking with my sister and I was like, okay, so I taught English in Japan. I worked for Winnipeg Child and Family Services for a while as a support worker. And so I love teaching. I am interested in the social work, and spirituality has always been important to me. And like, I wish that there was some way I could combine all three jobs. And so I ended up going onto our Facebook group. And I don't even know if you're in that Facebook group that I'm talking about, but
I'm not. I always assumed that you had to be Christian or ex-Christian, and I'm Jewish,
oh,
so I mean, is that not
oh,
correct?
I I don't think that that would matter, but
Okay, cool. I'll check it
I
out
don't
then.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I wanted to do all three things. And so I kind of wrote about it in that Facebook group. And this is actually how I found my therapist too. Somebody had commented, oh, I know somebody who does this. Here's his website. And I went to his website and I started bawling and I contacted him. And so he's my therapist because of that. And I was like, yeah, I think this is something that I could really get into. And when I did my practicum at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto, I remember talking with my supervisor about social work because I was working with people who are withdrawing from alcohol and substances, and there's a lot of need there for housing or jobs or like practical things that a social worker would help them with. And I remember wrestling with that, and my supervisor's like, well, this is the job of a psychotherapist, is to do the emotional healing. If you want to be a social worker, then you can focus on jobs and housing. So you really have to pick what you want to do. And I was like, I think emotional healing is more important. And yeah, of course, housing and jobs and financial security and food security are very important. But I think it's more impactful to do the emotional healing work. So I'm still a psychotherapist.
Nice. So you're drawn to all parts, but this is if you had to make a choice, this was the choice you made.
I feel like the psychotherapy is like kind of the combination because there are kind of ways that you can do social services work, like make referrals out to people, like recognize this is a need, and yeah, you definitely need to work on that. So let's see if we can find any services that may be able to help you, but also still being able to focus on the psychoeducation of whatever they're struggling with. And the spirituality comes into my psychotherapy work because spirituality is so much more than just believing in God or praying or going to a religious service or attending a community or whatever. Spirituality is in the beliefs and meanings that we have about ourselves and everything and everybody around us too. And so I find like I can still connect spiritually with clients, even though it's not a spiritual religious discussion.
Yeah, I love that. So some follow-up questions. The
I
two
do
main
have
ones
to
for
go
now.
soon.
You have to go? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, we are at time. So in that case, we will keep this close. I'll ask you one last question.
Okay.
What would your advice be? And it could be words of validation or specific resources
Mhm.
to somebody else in your situation. Somebody who's,
Somebody else
making their own journey out.
who's currently making their journey out.
Yeah, exactly. A few years behind you, that kind of thing.
Mhm. I would say trust yourself. You're smarter than you think you are. And if God really loves you, then you'll be okay. I feel like that's a weird one to say.
I love that.
If
I think
God
that was
really
great.
loves you, you'll be okay. Yeah.
I think what you're saying is if God really loves you, you don't need to fear his wrath of doing the wrong thing because it should supersede
That's a good
your
interpretation.
yeah,
You'll be okay. Yeah.
you'll be okay.
It's hard. It is hard for sure. But
Amazing.
there's
Well, thank you,
life on the
Jennie.
other side. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Beyond Belief. If you found the episode inspiring, please share it with others who might benefit from it, and be sure to subscribe to it to get updates about future episodes.